Hi, welcome. For decades, predictive algorithms have spearheaded decisions not only in courts but also on music platforms, suggesting songs based on user preferences. Banks use algorithms to determine your creditworthiness. Employers use them to screen job applications. But how accurate or fair are these algorithms? In this video, I will take you through how COMPAS, a predictive algorithm widely used in United States courts, has impacted court decisions over the past decades and the way forward. Created in 1989 by Tim Brennan, a statistician, and Dave Wells, a corrections program manager, COMPAS, Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions, aimed to predict recidivism, thus crime reoffending rates for defendants standing court trial. Over time, what began as a tool to aid rehabilitation evolved into a decision-making powerhouse for judges. COMPAS has 137 questions across domains like family history, personal beliefs, and criminal records, even though its owner Northpoint, now Equivent, argues that only a few of the questions play a critical role in the algorithm's analysis. Examples include questions about a family's history of imprisonment, close friends who have taken illegal drugs, and very controversial issues like stealing food to survive. Responses are fed into a proprietary algorithm to generate a risk score of either low, medium, or high to aid judges in making sentencing or parole decisions. Imagine someone convicted of theft. Recidivism measures the odds of them committing another theft after release or even while on parole. Since the adoption of COMPAS, many U.S. courts have relied heavily on it to make decisions on parole and releases. However, in 2016, an investigation by ProPublica showed very worrying revelations. ProPublica looked at more than 10,000 criminal defendants in Broward County, Florida, and compared their predicted recidivism rates with the rates that actually occurred over a 2-year period. In forecasting who would reoffend, the algorithm correctly predicted recidivism for black and white defendants at about the same rate, 59% for white defendants and 63% for black defendants, but made mistakes in very different ways. The investigation revealed that black defendants were often predicted to be at a higher risk of recidivism than they actually were. The analysis found that black defendants who did not recidivate over a 2-year period were nearly twice as likely to be misclassified as higher risk compared to their white counterparts. White defendants were often predicted to be less risky than they were, and the analysis found that white defendants who reoffended within the next 2 years were mistakenly labeled low risk almost twice as often as black reoffenders. It was also revealed that even when controlling for prior crimes, future recidivism, age, and gender, black defendants were 45% more likely to be assigned higher risk scores than white defendants. Even more shocking, black defendants were 77% more likely to be assigned higher risk scores than white defendants for violent recidivism. Picture 2 jars, one for black defendants and one for white. Each time COMPAS gets it wrong, you drop a marble in the corresponding jar. By the end of the day, the black jar overflows, while the white jar remains only half full. COMPAS highly perpetuated racial bias, the very social issue it was originally meant to solve or minimize. The overall accuracy of the algorithm in predicting recidivism was 65%, but when discussing human lives, even a 1% margin of error should be a big concern. Here are some practical cases that have baffled analysts and justice seekers as to how the algorithm analyzed responses. Brescia, an 18-year-old black girl, took an $80 bike and scooter in the state of Florida. COMPAS labeled her high risk. Meanwhile, Vernon, a 41-year-old white man with multiple armed robbery convictions, was labeled low risk despite stealing $86 in tools. After their release, Brescia committed no further crimes. However, Vernon was convicted of burglary 2 years later. Meanwhile, Saw Jones, a girl who had never committed a crime, was rated medium risk and charged a bond amount of $1,000 for being with Brescia while she stole the bike. She spent 2 nights in jail with Brescia before being released on bond. Paul Zilli stole a lawnmower and tools in Wisconsin. The defense and prosecution agreed on a plea deal for a year in jail and supervision. However, Zilli's COMPAS score labeled him as high risk for violent crimes. The judge dismissed the plea and sentenced him to 2 years in prison and 3 years of supervision. In 2013, Dylan Fugit, a white man, and Bernard Parker, a black man, faced similar drug charges in Florida. COMPAS labeled Fugit low risk and Parker high risk. Yet, the outcomes flipped expectations. Fugit reoffended multiple times while Parker never did. A 16-year-old black boy involved in a school fight was labeled high risk, his family's history of incarceration influencing the score. Meanwhile, a white teenager with a DUI and prior arrests scored medium risk due to a higher socioeconomic background. In 2014, Gregory Lugo was arrested for grand theft auto, a crime he had committed multiple times before. But COMPAS labeled him low risk. Meanwhile, Mallory Williams, a black woman with only 2 misdemeanors, was branded high risk. Lugo reoffended soon after his release, while Williams never committed another crime. It is revealing to know that the algorithm scores made little sense even to defendants who had been favored by its predictions. James Ravelli, a 54-year-old Florida man, was arrested in August 2014 for shoplifting 7 boxes of Crest White strips from a CVS drugstore. Despite a criminal record that included aggravated assault, multiple thefts, and felony drug trafficking, COMPAS classified him as low risk. When told by a reporter that he had been rated low risk at 3 out of a possible 10, Ravelli said, "I am surprised it is so low. I spent 5 years in state prison in Massachusetts, but I guess they don't count that here in Broward County." In contrast, Robert Cannon, a black man arrested for a similar shoplifting offense, received a much higher risk score despite having a less serious criminal history. These are just a few of the many cases of injustice resulting from the use of COMPAS, most of which were eventually against black defendants. But the deeper questions that unsettled analysts across the globe after reading ProPublica's publication centered on what features were most important to the algorithm during the analysis of a defendant's file. Was the algorithm deliberately set up to keep more of a particular race in jail? North Point did not release the operational code of the algorithm for analysis and audit due to privacy reasons. So, Haney Farid began work to find out what traits of a defendant were most important to the algorithm and how such features link to any race. Haney Farid and his team recruited 400 participants from a crowdsourcing platform. Participants were shown short paragraphs about 1,000 defendants from a dataset of 8,000 real-life cases. Paragraphs involved 7 data points including age, sex, juvenile, and adult criminal history. Race was excluded to remove explicit bias. Participants had 10 seconds per case to answer. Will this person reoffend within 2 years? Yes or no? The results from the responses showed stark resemblance to the predictions of COMPAS. Humans achieved an accuracy of 67% compared to COMPAS's 65%. This made things even more complex as both humans and COMPAS displayed similar racial biases. The responses showed that 37% of black defendants were incorrectly labeled as high risk versus 27% of whites. Whites were more likely to be mislabeled low risk, 40% versus 29%. This startling finding raised 2 key questions. Why does a supposedly advanced algorithm perform no better than random people? And why do both humans and the algorithm share the same racial bias? With this insight, Haney Farid decided to reverse engineer the algorithm's predictions. Through various classification techniques, they eventually discovered that arrest history, one of the strongest predictors in COMPAS, was also a proxy for race. For example, black individuals in New York City were 15 times more likely to be arrested for low-level marijuana charges than whites despite similar usage rates. Feeding this biased data into algorithms amplifies systemic inequalities. Judges often trust COMPAS because it's marketed as using advanced AI and machine learning. However, Farid's simplest model, based on just 2 factors, age and total prior crimes, matched COMPAS's accuracy, revealing that the presumed complexity of predictive algorithms is often a facade, masking a simplistic and deeply flawed system. In 2013, Eric Loomis, a white man in Wisconsin, challenged COMPAS's role in his sentencing. He argued that it violated his rights because he couldn't understand or contest the algorithm's decision-making process. His case became a flashpoint for AI ethics in the legal system. COMPAS operates as a black box, keeping its methodology secret under proprietary protection, making the audit of their system impossible. The question that has been asked several times is, when COMPAS makes an error, who takes responsibility? Algorithms ignore the capacity for change, reducing individuals to data points. But we know that people grow and circumstances change. Can an algorithm ever predict that? As I conclude this video with a call to a fair justice system everywhere in the world, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking quote from Bryan Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. We are all implicated when we allow other people to be mistreated. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. That's about it from me now, but let me hear from you. In this fast-paced AI battlefield we find ourselves, do you think courts would ever go back to the days of old? See you in my next episode. Stay safe and have a good one.